I do too. It's a great question. Now, George W. Bush just told Bob Woodward in this most recent book, a very poignant interview at times, because Bush seems very humbled and chastened. Because he's leaving office, he doesn't need to give just the strong man for the next round against Congress. And in a very poignant interview with Woodward, I saw this, Bush said, "I failed. I failed." And he said, "I failed to change the tone in Washington. I came in, I'd had a Democrat as a lieutenant governor in Texas. I thought I knew how to work with Democrats. But I got to Washington, and it was a totally different game." And he is bearing the brunt for the divisiveness. Now, this is interesting. He sounded like a very chastened man. You all will see these interviews as well. They're going to be aired all over the place. And I'll be curious what you think. If we meet again, you'll have to tell me what you think of whether Sarah Palin can survive the environment in Washington if she's elected and actually bring about that change. Yes, ma'am. Joan.
America is graying, and as you know, older people tend to vote more than the younger people do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but you still said that about 75% of the younger people are going to vote. Not 75% of the younger people are going to vote, but they're going to be in more numbers.
Yes.
How do you think this will play out in this election then? The older versus the younger?
Well, you know, that's so interesting because your demographic is the most reliable demographic at the polls. I mean, people want to reach out to you because you do have the experience, you know what's at stake in an election. Young people are notoriously fickle. You're absolutely right. And you know Rick Albom? Rick Albom, Channel 8, and I had a discussion. It was right before I went on the air, but we had a discussion off camera. And he told me, he said, "You know, I just don't buy it that young people will actually go out to the polls on election day." And I said, "I know the polls, the public polling right now suggests that they will, but I think that they will come out in more numbers. I think there is change." But you know, your question is absolutely right. There's not as much change as has been talked about. Our system has become so big. Habits have become so entrenched. I was with a group of young people a week ago tonight out on the Allendale campus, handed out brochures to about 1,000 freshmen. I don't know, 4,000 filed by us, Mandy, something like that. And I tried to engage as many as I could. Are you registered to vote? And you know, you could see it in the eyes right away. If they really were, I mean, a good number of them did say, "Oh, you bet I'm registered. I can't wait till November 4th. I have my guy," you know, or whoever I'm voting for. A lot of them didn't want to be embarrassed, and so they kind of avoid your eyes, and they say, "Yeah," you know, but you could tell they hadn't quite gotten around to it. A lot of them were confused and didn't know whether they could register in Allendale if they come from Birmingham, Michigan. If they come from Oakland or Macomb County, you know, so they weren't sure what the rules are from the Secretary of State's office. The Hauenstein Center is trying to solve this problem. We have a website that I hope that you will all visit called www.allpresidents.org. www.allpresidents.org. We have links to our Secretary of State's office. We have Election Central there so that you can refer young people or anybody that you know who hasn't been registered or hasn't gotten involved yet in this election. You can refer them to our website and they'll get everything I hope they need. It's a one-stop shop for election 2008.
I just want to interject too about to support what Gleaves has said about the young voters. Many of you know I have a daughter that just went to Alma College. She, without coaxing, has already filed for her absentee ballot.
There you go.
And it was totally random, and but she took the initiative to file for her absentee ballot before she went away to college.
Wow. Great. Well, you're doing something right, Mom.
Well, but that speaks for what you said. Young people are involved.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Back row.
I don't know what you know about the bridge to nowhere. I heard this morning she was for it, and then she was against it, and then. But my son, who's visiting from Arkansas and has a different idea about everything that I do, he said, "But she took the money, Mom."
Oh.
Well, that's interesting. I think we're all still sorting out a lot about Sarah Palin's background, and that's appropriate at this point. Let me just make this point. I don't mind if a politician changes his or her mind on principle. I want them to be able to grow while in office because they are going to encounter things they never dreamed they would encounter. So I don't make too much of the so-called flip-flopping. Every politician does it. For example, let me use a couple of examples. Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, signed the most open pro-choice bill in the United States as governor of California. But as president of the United States, he was even having articles under his byline in Human Life Review, and of course vowing to nominate Supreme Court justices who are pro-life. People change their minds. And it's important that we give them the space to do it as citizens. If we make such a mantra of flip-flopper that no politician would ever change his or her mind, ladies and gentlemen, we're only hurting ourselves, ultimately. We want our politicians to grow in office. We're going to have to sort that out about the Bridge to Nowhere. I do know the Bridge to Nowhere had about 3 supporters in the United States. So she was smart to change her position as governor. And we had a question over here. I think last question.
You didn't mention much about the Supreme Court. I'm wondering if the power of the president to nominate judges to the Supreme Court will be a factor in this election.
Thank you for asking that. Very good question. I always point out that presidents have a huge impact on our foreign policy because of their treaty power and their commander-in-chief power. So watch what they want to do in foreign policy. They do have a huge impact on the economy by the tone they set, the tax cuts, their communication with the head of the Fed, president of the Fed, of course, that sets monetary policy. So in fiscal policy, monetary policy, the president does have a huge impact on our economy. In the bully pulpit, of course, they will set a tone for the country. But the other way that presidents have a huge impact, and I would argue one of the largest cultural, in addition to judicial impacts in the United States, is who they want to nominate to the Supreme Court, who they send up to the Senate. You know, the judiciary right now is pretty evenly split. It's going to be important who the next president is because, as we say down in Texas, I guarantee you that next president will be able to appoint 2, 3, maybe more Supreme Court justices. How many did Nixon? I mean, I think Nixon didn't he have 4? Brian, do you know how many it was? I think it was 4.
It was 4, we decided.
Yeah, so, and 2 were roundly rejected. I mean, Nixon had quite the experience. It's been a little bit unusual for Clinton and Bush as 8-year presidents to only have 2 apiece. That's been unusual. I think the next president, John Paul Stevens, President Ford's appointee to the Supreme Court, will definitely be retiring in the next 4 to 8 years. And the impact, and some others are getting up in years, and I think that the impact that the next president will have culturally and judicially will be huge in the Supreme Court. I always like it when that point can be brought out. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being a great audience.